The night was cold, the river dark. On one bank lay the province Caesar ruled, on the other, the heart of the Republic. In 49 BCE, Rome was a fragile giant, an empire abroad, but a battlefield of politics at home. The Senate, fearing Caesar's growing influence, ordered him to disband his army and return as a private citizen. That meant political ruin, and likely death. Behind him, thousands of hardened legionaries waited, loyal not to the Senate, but to him. Before him, the Rubicon, a shallow stream by geography, but a chasm by law. Crossing it with an army was treason, punishable by execution. Yet retreat meant surrendering everything he had built, his command, his wealth, his legacy. Rome's power brokers had underestimated the man who had conquered Gaul. They saw a general, Caesar saw himself as destiny's chosen. The stakes were absolute: submit and vanish from history, or defy the Republic and Caesar. As dawn approached, Caesar is said to have whispered, Alea iacta est, the die is cast. With that, his legions splashed forward, their standards rising from the mist. It was no longer a question of if Rome would change, but how much blood would pay for it. The Republic had just begun to die. The Roman military machine, Caesar's power, did not rest on titles or Senate decrees. It marched on iron-shod sandals. His legions were not merely soldiers, they were an extension of his will, forged in the brutal campaigns of Gaul. Each man had faced winters in the north, ambushes in forests, and sieges against fortified towns. They had seen Caesar fight in the mud beside them, sharing their hunger, rewarding their courage with golden glory. Roman military discipline was merciless. A soldier who disobeyed could be flogged, or worse, executed before his comrades. Yet Caesar balanced fear with fierce loyalty. He addressed his troops as Camillatone's fellow soldiers, and remembered their names. To them, he was not just a commander, he was a patron, a protector, and the guarantor of their future wealth. The legion was a war machine, each cohort trained to move, fight, and kill as one. Their equipment was uniform: short gladius for stabbing, large scutum for defense, and pilum javelins to shatter enemy lines. Fortifications could be built overnight, bridges in days, roads in weeks. By the time he reached the Rubicon, Caesar commanded not only hardened veterans but men willing to risk their lives for him personally. This was no army of Rome. This was Caesar's army, and in 49 BCE, that was the most dangerous force in the world. Key historical moment. Battle: the crossing of the Rubicon was not a thunder of drums or clash of steel. It was a quiet defiance that would ignite a civil war. As Caesar's legion waded into the shallow stream, the act was irreversible. He had declared war on the Republic itself. Word traveled fast. By the time he reached Ariman, panic gripped Rome. Pompey the Great, once Caesar's ally, now his rival, held command of the Senate's forces. He had prestige, resources, and the legal right to act, but Caesar had speed. Moving with terrifying efficiency, he seized key towns without resistance. His veterans, drilled to perfection, advanced like a blade slicing through silk. The first real stand came in the cities loyal to the Senate. Yet even here, Caesar's reputation worked as a weapon. Many garrisons surrendered without a fight, preferring negotiation over annihilation. His strategy was surgical: secure supply lines, capture strategic crossings, and avoid costly battles until momentum was his. The psychological impact was devastating. Rome's leaders fled south, leaving the city defenseless. No swords had yet crossed in major battle, but the Republic had already lost its center. This was more than a march. It was a masterclass in political warfare. By taking the Rubicon, Caesar hadn't just crossed a river, he had crossed into history as the man who made civil war inevitable. Political intrigue and power plays while Caesar advanced north to south, Rome itself became a chessboard of fear and ambition. The Senate, fractured by rivalries, looked to Pompey as their champion. Yet even Pompey hesitated. He had underestimated Caesar's speed, expecting time to raise a larger army. Instead, he found himself retreating, a move that made him appear weak in the eyes of allies. Behind closed doors, senatorial factions plotted. Some demanded a full defense of the Republic at all costs. Others whispered about negotiating with Caesar to preserve their estates and lives. Old alliances crumbled under the weight of urgency. Caesar, ever the political tactician, issued proclamations portraying himself as the defender of Rome's dignity, not its destroyer. He claimed he marched only to protect his tribunus plebis whose rights had been violated. To the public this sounded like loyalty to tradition. To his enemies, it was pure propaganda, a justification for seizing power. Pompey secured the treasury and ordered senators to follow him to Capua, then to Brundisium, preparing to flee across the Adriatic. It was a calculated move: regroup in Greece, gather reinforcements, and crush Caesar with superior numbers. But each day he delayed gave Caesar more ground, both in territory and in the minds of the Roman people. The Republic was no longer a united government. It was to rival dictatorships forming in real time. Cultural impact and daily life. Civil war in Rome did not only rage on battlefields, it seeped into the streets, homes, and markets. For ordinary citizens, Caesar's march meant uncertainty. Grain shipments stalled as trade routes became military corridors. Prices soared, and bread lines grew longer. Wealthy families fled the city with their valuables, while the poor were left to gamble on which side would feed them. In the countryside, farms were stripped to supply the legions. Horses, wagons, and even family labor were taken in the name of the cause. Some communities welcomed Caesar, believing his promises of debt relief and land reform. Others hid their goods, fearing the war would never end. For soldiers, life was a blend of discipline and hardship. Long marches, hastily built camps, and the constant readiness for battle wore men down. Yet Caesar's veterans remained fiercely loyal, their bond forged in years of conquest. They knew that victory could mean land grants, gold, and lifelong honor. Culturally, the war began to erode the very idea of a shared Roman identity. Loyalty to the res publica was replaced by loyalty to a man, whether Caesar or Pompey. The Republic's political traditions, once sacred, became tools of manipulation. The shift was subtle but irreversible. Rome was learning to live under the rule of individuals, not institutions. The turning point. By spring of 49 BCE, the war's momentum tilted sharply toward Caesar. His rapid advance through Italy forced Pompey into a full retreat. Cities opened their gates rather than face siege, and with each surrender, Caesar's authority grew. He now controlled Rome's heartland without fighting a decisive battle, a victory of speed and psychology. Seizing the moment, Caesar entered Rome itself. The Senate seats were half empty, the Forum eerily quiet, without resistance. He claimed the state's resources, including the treasury Pompey had failed to empty. This gave him the funds to finance a campaign beyond Italy. Pompey, meanwhile, gathered his forces in Greece, confident he could crush Caesar on foreign soil. But the flight from Italy had cost him prestige. His portrayal as the Republic's defender began to weaken as Caesar painted him as a coward abandoning the capital. Caesar's next move was daring. Instead of consolidating power at home, he pursued his rival across the Adriatic. It was a high-stakes gamble. To leave Rome without his presence meant risking unrest. But to delay meant giving Pompey time to gather a massive army. The die had been cast months earlier at the Rubicon, but now Caesar's actions ensured there was no path back to compromise. The war was entering its decisive phase, one that would end with only a single master of Rome. Consequences and historical impact. The clash between Caesar and Pompey ended at Pharsalus in 48 BCE. Outnumbered, Caesar used discipline and tactical deception to shatter Pompey's lines. Pompey fled and was murdered in Egypt. Not by Caesar's hand, but by those hoping to win his favor. With his greatest rival gone, Caesar stood unrivaled. The victory, however, came at the cost of the Republic's foundation. Civil war had shown that an ambitious general, backed by loyal legions, could seize Rome by force. Laws and traditions that once restrained power now seemed fragile illusions. Senators who opposed Caesar were exiled, stripped of influence, or executed. Rome's territories felt the change. Provincial governors owed their positions directly to Caesar, bypassing the old electoral process. Public works and games expanded, but so did the centralization of power. The Senate still met, but it no longer decided Rome's fate. It merely ratified the will of one man. Historians would later see this as the moment when the Republic's death became irreversible. Even after Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, the precedent was set. Rome could be ruled by personal command rather than collective governance. The Rubicon had been a shallow river in Italy, but in history it became a deep divide, a point after which Rome could never return to what it had been. Caesar's decision to cross the Rubicon was more than a bold military gamble. It was a calculated rejection of political submission. In that single act, he proved that in Rome, power belonged not to institutions, but to those willing to seize it. The Republic, already weakened by decades of corruption and factionalism, could not survive such a challenge. In modern times, the phrase crossing the Rubicon has come to mean passing the point of no return. Politicians, generals, and corporate leaders alike face moments where hesitation means defeat. and action means irreversible change. Caesar's story warns us that such choices reshape not just the fate of the decision-maker, but of entire systems. The Roman Republic's collapse also offers a cautionary tale. When laws are bent for convenience, when personal loyalty replaces loyalty to the state, and when military power overshadows civic duty, even the strongest republics can fall. Caesar's triumph ushered in an era of emperors, some brilliant, some disastrous, but all wielding power that would have been unthinkable a century earlier. Rome gained stability, expansion, and monumental architecture, but lost its experiment in shared governance. The die was cast in 49 BCE, yet its echo still reaches us today. The question remains, in our own age, who will dare to cross their Rubicon, and what republics will not survive it?